My name's Tim Gander, and this is a summary of the research I did while supported by Core Education as part of the 2014 eFellows. I'm eternally grateful for the guidance of John Finauti and Louise Taylor, who along with the other eFellows stimulated and challenged my thoughts and ideas throughout the year. I must also thank my department and school in supporting me in covering my lessons along the journey. My research looks into how we've tried to reimagine agency in a traditional setting, and the transition from being intrinsically motivated to learn when you start school by asking questions about how and why things work, and how most people finish by being extrinsically motivated by how many credits it's worth and how many words it has to be. My research was around agency in the traditional setting, and I say traditional in the sense that the school's over 100 years old and we haven't got beanbags scattered all through the classrooms, but the school and the leadership have been really supportive of allowing me to attempt to modify my teaching practice in an innovative way. So I acknowledge the school for this. So this first slide is a picture of my son, and this is where the journey begins. He's the learner that I know the most about, and he's been the catalyst for lots of the thinking I've done this year around learner agency. Most of us will have a picture like this if you've got children that are over 5 years old, as this is the morning of his very first day entering into our official education system. As a parent and an educator, I saw him struggle with the transition from ECE to primary, and the immense excitement building up to the start of big school, and then the slow realisation that it's not as self-paced and as agentic as his experiences at ECE. After the first week, he came home and asked us, and we had this horrible gut-wrenching and heart-bleeding conversation about when was he going to be able to choose what he wanted to do, like at Montessori. And we had that stark realisation and had to tell him that it was probably going to be like this for the next 12 or 13 years. When he was at Montessori, he really enjoyed the way he could manage his own learning and direct his time on task. And this agentic approach is the foundation of many of the alternative models from this sector. Reggio Emilia and Montessori are built on the belief that the child is the centre of the learning and they can do it themselves. Many teachers will say that assessment gets in the way of agency beyond ECE, and schools are assessment driven, and league tables, national standards and the NCEA quash any autonomy or learner agency. But I knew how hard it was for my son and how he felt he was losing his spark and motivation at school. So I wanted to see if I could walk the talk, and with the pressure of assessment in a level 2 PE class, if it was possible to foster learner agency. Although it's a generalisation, this picture reflects the socially constructive view of what teaching and learning is. It will be what most of the parents at our schools think learning's about. In one of the keynotes at ULearn this year, Yoram Harpaz conducted a really interesting online activity where all the participants had to fill in a form and state what pedagogical ideologies were present in our schools. More than half of the 1,500 teachers in the room believed that this is what was happening in our schools. And this was particularly interesting as at least 70% of the audience were from the primary sector. This could be a whole separate research or investigation, but have a look at the core blog for more info, because it really highlights that there are many non-agentic approaches happening in our schools, and it is what people think is happening in our learning institutions. So this low agency approach was how I started my journey of teaching, and I was teaching in a way that I was taught, and it was also the way I was shown to teach at college. But when I moved to New Zealand, I tried to teach in the same way and it didn't really work. I had to adapt it and develop a method that suited the learner and the context. The boys at my school are so amiable, and it's really hard to teach in a way that inhibits that two-way communication and the notion of ako. Agency starts to occur when learners shift from being passive recipients to being active and constructive in the learning process. They're involved in the decisions about learning. Perhaps one thing to note, though, is that agency is differentiated from autonomy, as it allows us to move on from the term personalised learning, which could indicate that the learner operates in a bubble without consideration of others and their environment. Agency aims to remedy that by emphasising interaction with others in the learning process. They're interdependent and must interact for the greater good. And this is my key learning around agency. So, with the help of my students, we planned on transforming how the teaching and learning occurred in our classroom within the boundaries of a secondary school and the confines of the NCEA. So, we started off with a specific learning site, an online site, which underpinned much of the work we did and had all the content on there so the boys could access it and learn about anything they could ever need to learn about. But this wasn't necessarily new, and a website is generally one-way traffic where each user has the same experience. And this almost mirrors the transmission approach to education that we're trying to move away from. It's an example of a common tool in teaching, but not really a transformation or method unless it's combined with other approaches and other opportunities for student voice. So we ended up engaging student voice, and I asked the boys what they wanted to do, and we ended up coming up with an online collaborative learning community. And the boys decided that since they all had phones, or at least the internet at home, a Google Plus community would be great. And this would allow the students to bounce ideas off each other and share resources and create their own connected support network. This is a really practical way to foster learner agency. And there's plenty of theory to support this through constructivism and connectivism. And I've written about the benefits of using a community in more detail on my blog, but in this process it was just one of the steps we took. It was also an interesting vehicle to investigate social presence and digital citizenship, but I won't necessarily talk about that today. I've got a few posts on my blog about that. However, the first thing we did, and perhaps the most powerful in this whole process, was co-constructing what agency meant. I felt that I couldn't tell them what agency was, and to me that's saying to defeat the whole point of it. Agency is about listening to student voice and consistently understanding what it means to them. And through different channels, this was the first step in creating learner agency. By doing this, I could listen to the different voices in the class and share the diversity within the classroom. And then what the boys came up with at the beginning was really the socially constructed version of what teaching and learning looked like. And this was unsurprising. This involved knowledge retention, passing the test, summative assessment. But really I wanted to challenge them in their beliefs and hand ownership over to them to create their own ways of learning and working that could work for them. And as I said, the most transformational part of using this approach was listening and watching the students communicating. And there was now a diversity of who I was communicating with. The process changed the voice of who was making the noise. And you'll know as teachers that there are often all the students in the class who were really keen to join in and raise their hands and be part of discussions. But there are also those students who don't want to take part. And this doesn't mean that they're not thinking or they don't have good ideas. But by using this mode of communication, it allowed those students another way to communicate. It was empowering for them to have their own voice and to be able to let everyone else know what they were thinking without having to put their hands up and having the pressure of everyone knowing what they're saying straight away. Some students are shy, some students aren't, but really notice the ones that have got the confidence to talk in front of others. And this allows the freedom and access of ways of representing their own ideas and their own opinions. And it's similar to the approaches emphasised in the Universal Design for Learning framework and allowing students multiple methods of representing their own knowledge. And some of these comments that are coming up on the screen right now just come from students that I'd never even heard of stringing together more than one sentence. So it was great to allow them to put this information into the forum and for comment and reflection. So in a traditional school, we ended up establishing there were some barriers, and those two barriers were time and credits. But after a while, these ended up turning into positives. And time was sidestepped by the boys volunteering to go into lunchtime or interval. And the boys came up with this one, it wasn't my idea. These are 17-year-old boys who are keen to miss out on stuffing themselves with whatever high-fat content food they could find in the cafe to look for how they can improve a left-handed volleyball serve through biomechanics. So it's a win-win, really. Another way we looked at it and worked around the limited time we had in the 4-hour blocks was enabling 20% time. Or as I said, we got 4-hour blocks, so this ended up being 25% time. This was a real carrot and seemed to motivate the boys. It allowed them the time to follow things that they were really interested in. from training or practical performance or working on research. This had to be supported, however, by the boys sharing what they achieved and how it was related to the internal assessments through our Google Plus community. And this was a way of making the learning visible and just keeping a check on everything that was going on. By using this media-rich element of the online community, the boys could share as many selfies of them lifting weights as they liked. And this also roused an element of competition between the boys, and again, providing opportunities for personal success and showing what they were doing. And during this phase, the learning was completely self-directed and reflected upon during these sessions. And then the credits thing, and really the thing that was actually paid to do, that was a slightly larger thing to tackle. The way we got around this was, as a group, we decided to customise what we were going to learn about, and we ended up adapting the content to allow the learners ownership. And I really think NCA, internal assessment, is amazing and flexible, and I can't emphasise enough how lucky we are to have this in New Zealand, allowing us as teachers autonomy in how we construct the curriculum. I gave the boys access to all the internals in a shared folder, and they could comment on them through Google Documents, and we also used a form with the results embedded at the bottom, which allowed us to crowdsource potential modifications. And there's a link on the screen, and I've done similar things with literature reviews with students, and they really enjoy the amount of output that this has created over a short amount of time. In a lesson you can gather lots and lots of data and responses and feedback about what you're actually covering. So at the end of the process we had an overview of all the standards available to us, and then divided it into modules. In each module, the students had the choice over about 4 different internal assessments. It simply allowed the students to literally touch and be part of the real things that are authentic to them, and allowed them freedom and specialisation in what they studied for. And this catered for that predictable variability in each class. I've got 2 children, and I know they're extremely different, and I can't expect them to be taught exactly the same, or at least react to what they're being taught. It really pains me to hear about teachers who've been teaching the same standard for years and years in the same way. And in that way, the classroom stays exactly the same and the lesson stays the same. And the only variable is the students passing through. We need to teach students we have, not the ones we used to have or want to have in the future. They're only with us for a finite amount of time, and we really have to make it count. So next year, I'm going to have to do the same thing again and create new assessments depending on the students I have in front of me. But this co-constructed document that we created together as a class was the anchor that we could return to again and again throughout the year, which provided guidance and scaffolding. So part of agency is obviously allowing learners the choice, but there's also the responsibility of the teacher to provide guidance in more of a facilitation style role. And I came up with this flowchart for each module, which allowed the boys choice in the path that they pursued, and essentially creating their own learning maps. So this was my attempt at allowing students autonomy and agency, as well as providing that scaffolding and making sure they weren't too much off task and not really knowing where they were going. And it goes through that process of allowing enabling constraints. So there were certain things that they couldn't necessarily go off and do. They couldn't go off and study any internal assessment at any time of the year whenever they wanted. Otherwise that would just turn into complete catastrophe and no one would ever know where they were and what they were doing. So in that vein, it was a method to stop them falling through the gaps. So within each module, they worked out how they were going to attain each standard. However, and this is the however part of my cyclical process where I reflected back and realised that as we approached the co-constructed submission time for one of the internals, a couple of these nodding and happy students who seemed to be eagerly going along their way and directing their own learning and just getting on with it, seemed to have quite large gaps in their knowledge, and some of the boys were employing more agency in their YouTube playlists than they were in their study. It was only a couple of students, but it wasn't really the outcome I desired of this whole class really motivated, working towards their own personal goals. And I was conscious that by supporting the students too much, I was taking their agency away. But in the end, we had to create another document called Falling Through the Gaps, specifically to support those students in the process of planning and managing time. In the end, this was instrumental in helping those boys who struggled to find the motivation to avoid those digital distractions in our online environment that we're now working in. I'm sure there's plenty of reasons why this behaviour was apparent, but it's something I'd really like to look into in the future, and why the students feel the need to go off. I mean, obviously, choosing your favourite song for half an hour is quite an intriguing and interesting thing to do, but when you've got a job to do, really you should be getting on with the learning. And as I mentioned, another thing that was worrying me was the depth of academic rigour I was enabling the boys to delve into. Was I spreading myself thinly as a teacher to allow the boys a wide choice? And as a teacher, was this really professionally acceptable? So even though I was conscious of loss of direction and put scaffolds into place to stop it happening, it still ended up happening. And there was a tension, hence the paperclip floating on water, between having the freedom of thought, choice and direction and the underlying aspects of effectiveness, efficiency and academic rigour. It opened up lots of questions that I still have unanswered. And I wanted to know if some students were unresponsive to an agentic approach, as they've not had the opportunity to exercise it in their own education or own lives, or is it just too hard to have agency and easier to be spoon-fed learning? I was constantly telling the boys, think about what you could do, you can do anything you like. Just ask me for help and I'll be there, let me know what you want to do. And they ended up asking me, well, I don't know what to do. It's too hard to think about. Tell me where I need to write the answers. Just tell me what I need to read and I'll write it in the box. And this defeated the whole idea of it. And I really felt confused and torn. Was I doing the right thing? And luckily the eFellows had a chance to meet up and discuss a couple of things. And these conversations acted as a real guidance. And we talked about how some students are having agency in not choosing to have agency. But then really we had to revisit what that meant and the whole idea behind agency. And one of the key attributes to the agentic learner is their realization of self-regulation. And the bottom line is that agency requires you to make choices in a way that makes a difference. And making a difference is why we're all teachers. Overall, enabling agency allowed extension and depth for the learners who ran with it, as well as authentic engagement and enjoyment from all of the boys. However, I was aware there was still an underlying tension in the balance between allowing agency and being told what to do for some of the learners. Some learners still needed plenty of guidance and support about how to be self-motivated and self-directed in an agentic online environment. They were just getting distracted too easily. But my message is, really don't be discouraged if you try this and it doesn't work. Again, it really comes down to knowing the learner and fostering whanaungatanga, positive relationships, and knowing who you've got in front of you, really. However, two comments that were echoed several times really stuck in my mind, and it made me feel like I've been doing the right thing as a teacher, as they weren't specifically about passing the year or gaining credits. Now, these comments came from boys who you'd probably call at risk, with no fixed abode or stable family life, a low regard to teachers and to school in general. And it started me thinking about those big questions about why are we teaching, and what are we teaching, and how are we going about it. An agentic approach made school a better place for these learners. In the end, as a teacher, I think you've got to listen to that voice in your head and decide what is best. But if you can use the voice of the learners as well on that journey, you're not only going to be able to engage and extend more of these learners, but also empower the ones that don't always have their say. Whether it's in their own lives at home, or in relationships, or in school life, we must give them opportunities to do this, because that's what they're going to need to do beyond school. And I think this is more of the reason why we all work in education. And in that way, it's potentially transformational for the learners and their engagement in not only school, but also in society. I know teachers in traditional schools can make a difference, and we're making a difference in fostering a culture of learner agency, regardless of the environment. Through e-learning, we've got the ability to listen every day and engage the learners we have in a wide range of ways. Hopefully, some of these take home or take to school points will summarise what I've been trying to talk about. In the future, I'd really look into different ways of engaging learners through learner agency, and perhaps also a longitudinal study to do with why some students have a greater sense of agency over others and look into reasons why perhaps they weren't necessarily engaged in having their own autonomy and ownership over their learning. And for me, I think that would be a really valuable thing to research in education, and perhaps look into ways in which we can support students who don't necessarily have their own personal sense of agency into supporting them so they can potentially integrate into society in an easier way. If you'd like to follow what I've been doing in this research in the future, please just visit my blog. There'll be a link to it at the end of this video or on my YouTube page. And please don't hesitate to email me any questions you might have or ideas which could help me in my journey and what I'm doing with Level 2 NCEAPE. Thanks for listening and thanks for watching, and look forward to hearing any constructive criticism.